Today on the Hobby Bench, I'll be talking about the 15-minute paint day. So if you're like me, you sort of paint in spurts. You're going to have about 2 or 3 weeks of output, paint a bunch of minis, and then you're going to sort of let things sit to the wayside. You sort of get burned out a little bit. And, you have probably, like me, just a backlog of unpainted miniatures that you need to work on. Just tons of stuff to go through. Especially for Kickstarters, I'm notorious about working on this with Reaper Bones. You get so many minis, and I'm really excited to paint them, and I start painting a few of them, and then you look at that and go, oh man, there's just so many to do, and I don't necessarily have time. And that's the biggest thing that you think about. That's the biggest impediment, is just time. You look through your miniatures and think, okay, I can get some work in, I've got a little time to do it. But then you're thinking, oh God, I got to set everything up and got to try to sit out and paint for about an hour or so. I just don't have the time. I got to do other stuff. I got to get some yard work done, get house chores going. There's other things that are going in your life, and think through of trying to set time aside for your hobby can be rather difficult. So this hits a lot of different folks. And so one possible solution to this I've heard from the writing community especially is what they call the 15-minute writing day. And for them, the idea is that, you probably don't have time to sit down and do a lot of work. So instead of trying to get out huge blocks of time set aside to write, really try to focus on short creative spurts and be consistent about it. And the idea is really to sit down for 15 minutes and just type. Just write 15 minutes and really try to push yourself to do it 15 minutes a day. And it doesn't sound like much, but truth is that you'll find out is that you're going to be slowly making progress towards your goal, towards your project, and getting that done. And the truth be told, we're all busy. We all have lots of stuff going on in our lives. It's really hard to set time aside to do creative endeavors, but you really can make time for 15 minutes. You can easily squeeze 15 minutes in during a day. The key is, of course, is try to stick with it and, try to do that work. So for me, I sort of adopted using that for a lot of my painting and just doing a 15-minute paint day. Now, I'm not perfect, but what I try to do is maybe about 4 or 5 days a week, put in 15 minutes a day. The idea is pretty simple. Get my things set up and then set a timer going and get that going for 15 minutes. Paint, and then when that 15 minutes is up, if I've got time and I want to keep going, fine. If not, I just pack it up. And the key is to really try to get in, if you can, 5 days a week. Now, what's going to happen is when the weekend rolls around, if I have time on a Sunday morning and want to paint, I can do it. But if I don't, if I really wanted to sort of lounge around and maybe do something else, watch some baseball or something like that, I can do that. I'm not really tied up in that concept of, oh man, I got these projects, I've got to paint, I've got to get these things done. Because I know if you're doing 15 minutes, at least, 5 days a week, you painted over an hour already. And slowly but surely, you're going to make progress on your projects. So that's the key I want to say about that, is really trying to embrace doing 15 minutes a day. Now, to get the 15-minute paint day working, what you really need to do is try to set things up around your paint station so that you can try to work efficiently setting up and breaking down. Obviously, if you have an established work area that's set aside for your painting, that's like the best way of doing it. But you may not be able to do that. So what I recommend is just trying to do some things that can sort of help out that process a little bit. One is possibly to use, get a box that'll have all your paints and everything set up. So the idea is that you have that up on a shelf, take it down, you can pull the things out that you need to do your painting, and then, if you need to pack it up, you can do that pretty quickly. And that sort of helps facilitate that process a little bit more. For certain, one thing I would recommend doing for sure is, like segregating out your paints. If you're using these paints for a certain project, put them aside. So that way, when you start up the next day, you don't have to spend time hunting around for like which paints did I use in your big paint rack. You've got these things set aside. Another thing that a lot of folks try to using is a wet palette. Now, I don't really use a wet palette much. When I am blending a lot of colors and I have projects that last a little bit longer and it takes a longer time doing it, these are really good. And the idea is that you've got, like a spongy material that you have that's moist, that's a little wet, and then you can put out parchment paper over that And that's what you'll put your paints on. And the idea is that the moisture from that will transfer through that parchment paper and allow the paints to stay basically wet, but not get really runny. And you can even use, like I say, a Tupperware container. I would probably get like maybe a dishcloth, something like that you has like a really nice even surface area. You try using a sponge, but there's a lot of pores in it. You're really not going to get an even transfer of liquid through that. So like maybe like a thick dish rag, that would probably be ideal, like a little sponge type material. But I don't really use wet palettes too much. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Another thing I want to recommend to you is that if you have lots of stuff painting, you want to take a break and maybe do a different project, for sure get like little index cards that keep track of what you painted on that and what colors that you used. This way, if you've got this like gobs and gobs of miniatures to paint out, like this whole platoon, you're doing a few of them, and you just sort of get burned out and you just don't want to paint those anymore. You can take a break, paint something else, and then when you want to, you can jump back in and say, oh, these are exactly the colors that I use for the webbing or for the trousers or for the rifles, that kind of stuff. It's a good thing to have. Last thing I'm going to say to you for doing this is I recommend maybe consider possibly contrast paints too, especially for doing lots of rank and file. Contrast paints are a tool. They're not going to be the perfect solution to making your painting easier. But I have found for a lot of my rank and file stuff, if I'm doing tons of zombies for County Road Z or survivors, or I need to paint up a bunch of Soviet 80s military for like Zona Alpha and working on that. It's nice to have these contrast paints. They really do speed up my process a little bit more because you don't have to do that extra wash. And it's good enough to leave, I think, a decent paint job, and I'm pretty happy with. So these are some things that you can use in helping out with your painting and trying to stick to the 15-minute paint day. So in conclusion, that's what I really want to try to push on, is that you work on a 15-minute paint day. We're all not perfect, but if you really try to adhere to that, try to get in a good 4 or 5 days a week, over time, you will make progress on your projects. That's an hour a week. You're guaranteed that you get in. And if you can get more time in, that's great. If you can't, you don't have to worry about it, because you are going to be making progress. You are going to be getting your stuff painted up. And there's little chunks of time. You can always find time in your schedule to do it. So I really stress that if you want to try to get your projects done, and you really want to try to get your output going a little bit more, a good baby step, if you will, is that 15-minute paint day. Just setting time aside, ideally every day if you can, but at least, 4 or 5 days a week, get those 15 minutes in and make progress painting.